Hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box. Well, a few months back, the oldest continually operating record shop in LA, the legendary Record Collector, went up for sale. And it wasn't quite clear what was going on at the time. But thanks to a new article in the SF Gate, the San Francisco Gate, we know a lot more about what is going on. So the background to this whole thing is that the store was put up for sale for 5 million a few months back, but that only includes the property. It doesn't include the business itself, meaning all of the records. And there are a lot of them. There's just under 1 million records on site and owned by the business in storage units. Now, for those who haven't seen the previous video, I just want to tell you a bit about what makes this shop so unique. It's run by owner Sandy Chase, and he's only ever had one employee, his assistant Henry, a very knowledgeable man. And Sandy is, of course, incredibly knowledgeable as well. Very strongly opinionated, hates anything digital. He calls himself some sort of analog crusader, and he was a musician himself professionally briefly, but has kept up with music and is incredibly passionate, mainly about classical, and also has a lot of knowledge about jazz. The shop carries multiple genres, but there is most certainly an emphasis on classical and jazz. Now, aside from having the biggest selection of records in LA, it's also famous for some of the rules that the owner, Sandy Chase, forces customers to go through. For instance, there's no browsing. Most record shops live and die by people going through the bins and the shelves and saying, oh, I like that. That's interesting. Many even have listening stations, but both of those things do not exist at the Record Collector. If you go in and attempt to browse, you'll be told quite sternly that it isn't how it works, that you have to go in, explain to the owner what you're looking for and why. Again, this seems to be at odds with the very anonymous and unpersonalized world of e-commerce, where you tell a website, I'm going to have this, and then it arrives at your door. This is the total opposite. It's a throwback to another time, and I love it because, while it might not be the most efficient way to run a business, when you're dealing with specialities like very old, and in some cases, 100-year-old 78s or cylinders. He sells those too, reel-to-reel tapes from the 50s, 60s, and sometimes into the 70s, and LPs from the 50s, 60s, and so forth. You're definitely in a niche market, particularly when you don't have a great deal of rock or pop stuff. He has some, don't get me wrong, but it's more than you would think, but it really is focused on jazz and classical. So he wants to know what you're looking for. He wants to know why you're looking for it. The prices are based on several factors, none of which is a price tag. So again, it's very old-fashioned. If he doesn't like you, then you're probably not going to have a very good experience there. But if he does like you, and if you show respect to his system and to his collection, he's going to treat you well. And if you demonstrate a clear knowledge about various record labels, various pressings, various musicians, whether it's jazz performers, orchestral composers, orchestral conductors, orchestras themselves, and if you show a knowledge of vintage hi-fi equipment from the mid-century, the mid-20th century, he's going to like you even more. And if you buy in bulk, he's going to like you even more from there. Again, it's a place that it's not for everyone, but if you are willing to play by those interesting rules, it's one of the most fascinating and enlightening experiences ever. And I think, as someone who's gone to record shops all over the world, I think it's one of the most interesting in the world. So the article takes the form of an interview, and a lot of people on things like Yelp and other sort of reviews, Google reviews, are very unkind to this shop. And I think that some of it is because of virality, because some of the bad reviews are actually very funny. Not necessarily because they're inaccurate, but because of the sort of violent reaction that some of these people have to the rule orientated and regimented way that Mr. Chase runs his record store. But this article I found was incredibly detailed and very fair, and it fortunately features an interview with Sandy. And he explained his rationale for why he's selling. Obviously, commercial real estate in LA is not worth what it was worth just a few years ago. And so he's not really surprised or even particularly worried that he's not going to sell this business anytime soon. He's thinking that it's sort of a prelude to a retirement, because as he said in the interview, he's been doing this for 50 years and he doesn't necessarily have the ability to have it within him to do it for another 50 years. He's getting on in age and he wants to slowly retire. And he made it clear in this interview that ideally, while the business itself isn't contingent on the sale of the building, he'd ideally like to sell both. And he'd want it to go into someone's hands who will preserve the ethos and the spirit and the vibe of what he's done at the Record Collector since 1974, both at the original location on Highland Avenue in LA and round the corner on Melrose, where he's been since I think the very late 80s or the early 90s. And I think that's a very fair way to go about things. If he just shut up the shop and sold the whole thing at auction or to a private collector or to a museum, the world would be deprived of this unique experience. But by putting it up for sale without the expectation that it's going to be sold quickly and taking the time to look for a buyer who will actually respect the ethos of the Record Collector and what it's represented for musicians, for music industry professionals, for professional collectors, and for those just starting their collection, I think that would be very important, because all of these great cities that are now definitely on a downward trend, they were built not by the number of McDonald's or Jiffy Lubes or Walmarts that you've got. They were built by the small, locally owned businesses that all had their own eccentricities and that were willing to do deals based on a smile and a handshake, even if it came after having to get to know the owner. I mean, when I was living in LA, I only really got to be on the good list after a couple of visits. And we're on the third visit, Sandy knew that, right, this guy isn't some browser. This guy actually knows what he's talking about and has a genuine interest in what he's doing. And I even had to exchange a few records because the pressings were a bit noisier than I wanted, and there was no problem. He's not really a money back kind of guy, though maybe he is for some, but I was happy to exchange it for something else. Things like that. So I'm really happy about it. If I had the 5 million plus to buy both the building and the records, of course I would do it, and I think a lot of others would too. But the problem is that this is priced so out of the range of your average record collector, but maybe somewhere there's some audiophile with a $1 million setup in his home that thinks, I want to take this to the next level and I want to become not only a collector, but a proprietor of a legendary shop. So thanks to Sandy Chase for allowing the world to know a bit more about your rationale for this. And I have to also give a shout out to the author of this article. Her name is Paula Mejia, if I apologize if I'm not pronouncing that right. Mejia, Mejia, I do believe. And she is an author, a journalist with the SFK. And I'm not a fan of a lot of journalism these days, but I actually thought she did a really good job giving us the info that we've been curious about and introducing people who might not have heard of this record shop before, just what it's all about. So I'll put that in the description below so you can look at the original article. And in the meantime, Sandy and Henry, as they've been for decades and decades, will still greet customers young and old at the Record Collector. So it's not even bittersweet. I think he's going about it the right way. Put a smile on my face. Like, subscribe. We'll see you next time. Take care.